They say rock bottom can either break you or build you. And when you look at the world's most successful startups, one thing becomes clear. Some of the biggest billion-dollar ideas were born not from wealth, but from struggle, rejection, and even desperation. The stories behind these companies aren't just about luck or good timing. They're about relentless drive, calculated risks, and the ability to see opportunity where others only saw failure. Let's dive into some of the most jaw-dropping rags-to-riches startup stories, the journeys that took people from being broke and overlooked to creating companies that reshaped industries and made billions in the process. Take Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, for example. In 2007, the two roommates in San Francisco were broke and couldn't afford their rent. Instead of giving up, they came up with a scrappy idea: rent out air mattresses in their apartment to travelers during a design conference when all hotels were fully booked. They called it Air Bed and Breakfast. What started as a desperate rent-saving hack grew into Airbnb, one of the most disruptive startups in travel history, now valued at tens of billions. Think about that for a second. Two guys on air mattresses in a tiny apartment ended up revolutionizing the entire hospitality industry. They went from broke to billion-dollar entrepreneurs because they spotted a gap in the market. Hotels were too expensive and too rigid, but people always had extra space in their homes. The magic wasn't the idea itself, it was the courage to test it and the grit to keep pushing, even when investors laughed them out of the room. Then there's Jan Koum, the man behind WhatsApp. Koum grew up in Ukraine in extreme poverty, where his family relied on food stamps after moving to California. He didn't even own a computer until he was 19, teaching himself coding from second-hand manuals. Years later, after being rejected by Facebook for a job, he started working on a simple messaging app to keep in touch with friends. That app became WhatsApp, which in 2014 was acquired by Facebook for a staggering $19 billion. Imagine the full circle moment. Rejected for a job, then building something so powerful that the same company that once turned you away paid billions to buy it from you. Koum's story shows that the road from broke to billionaire often starts with persistence in the face of rejection and the belief that simplicity sometimes wins the world. And how about Howard Schultz, the man who transformed Starbucks into a global empire? Schultz grew up in a poor housing complex in Brooklyn, watching his parents struggle financially. For him, coffee wasn't a luxury, it was just part of everyday life. When he traveled to Italy, he noticed the cafe culture, people lingering in coffee shops, connecting, building community. That vision became the foundation for Starbucks. But in the early days, Schultz struggled to raise funds. Banks didn't see how coffee could be big business, and he was constantly dismissed. Yet he persisted, betting everything on the belief that coffee shops could be about more than coffee. They could be about connection. Today, Starbucks is worth over $100 billion, and Schultz went from the projects to one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. His story proves that inspiration can come from everyday experiences, and execution can turn something ordinary into something extraordinary. But not all billion-dollar startup founders were aiming for global dominance. Some, like Sara Blakely, just wanted to solve a personal problem. Blakely was a saleswoman who couldn't stand visible panty lines under her white pants. With $5,000 in savings, she cut the feet off her pantyhose and invented what would become Spanx. At first, no manufacturer took her seriously. She was a woman with no fashion background, pitching a weird idea about shapewear, but she refused to give up, eventually convincing Neiman Marcus to sell her product. Spanx exploded in popularity, and Blakely became the youngest self-made female billionaire in America. From broke and frustrated with her wardrobe to changing women's fashion forever, her journey shows that sometimes the billion-dollar ideas are hiding in the problems we face every single day. And then there's Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp with Uber. Back in 2008, both men were frustrated because they couldn't get a cab in Paris. That frustration turned into a simple idea. What if you could order a ride at the tap of a button? Uber started with just a few black cars in San Francisco, but the concept exploded into a global phenomenon that disrupted transportation everywhere. Today, Uber isn't just about rides, It's about food delivery, freight, and autonomous vehicles. The founders went from broke entrepreneurs to billionaires, but the idea itself was so simple: make transportation easier. What set them apart wasn't just the app, but the courage to challenge powerful taxi unions, outdated regulations, and entrenched systems. They pushed through resistance, lawsuits, and protests because they believed convenience was worth fighting for. Even the world of social media is filled with stories of broke founders who turned nothing into billion-dollar empires. Take Evan Spiegel, Reggie Brown, and Bobby Murphy, the trio behind Snapchat. Spiegel and Murphy were Stanford students when they came up with the idea of disappearing photos. At first, people laughed. Why would anyone want a message that disappears? But they saw something others didn't. Younger generations wanted privacy, fun, and a break from the permanence of Facebook. They launched Snapchat, and despite endless criticism, it blew up into one of the most popular apps in the world. Today, Snapchat has hundreds of millions of users and billions in revenue, and Spiegel himself became one of the youngest billionaires in history. The app that was once dismissed as silly turned out to be a billion-dollar empire. Then you have Elon Musk's Tesla story, which often gets overlooked in the shadow of his fame. Musk poured his own money into Tesla after the PayPal sale, but by 2008 the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Musk himself was nearly broke, splitting rent money and borrowing cash from friends. He famously said he was days from bankruptcy when Tesla finally secured a funding round and landed a government loan. Fast forward to today, Tesla is worth hundreds of billions and Musk is one of the richest people on the planet. But the reality is, his road wasn't straight. Tesla could have failed countless times and Musk could have ended up broke. Instead, he took the kind of risk most people would never dream of, putting his last dollars into a vision of an electric future. What ties all these stories together isn't just the money, it's the mindset. Being broke didn't stop these founders. In fact, it fueled them. When you're broke, you're forced to be resourceful. You're forced to think differently. Subscribe for more stories that prove anything is possible.